Okay, so let's set that back to 0 for now, so we're all looking at the same thing. And next up, hyphenation. Now as we look at hyphenation, which is arguably a pretty fine detailed issue, let's zoom in on this text. So go ahead and press Control 4 or Command 4 on the Mac to zoom in so we can see this entire paragraph front and center in the screen. Now, as long as our cursor is inserted in this paragraph, we can change these paragraph options. That might be obvious to you by now, but some folks I still see, they'll select the entire paragraph. That's actually not necessary. It won't hurt, but it's not necessary. As long as you have your text cursor inserted in the paragraph, any paragraph formatting changes you make will automatically apply. So the one that we're going to look at in this case is hyphenation. So a single click will turn hyphenation on. Notice here right now on the right hand side, our text is justified, but we do have a little bit of funny spacing. These are frequently referred to as rivers of white space. Thinking of taking a canoe down this paragraph because there's so many empty spots. So let's turn on hyphenation. It takes just a second, and we can see that some of our words are now hyphenated, and we have a little bit better spacing up here in the top of this paragraph. Now, I would argue that InDesign has some of the best typography of any application I've ever seen. Just to give you some insight to that, let's come up here to the panel menu at the right-hand side of the control panel and look at a few advanced options. By default, InDesign uses the Adobe Paragraph Composer. This is a typography engine that has all sorts of rules in terms of how text is hyphenated, how it breaks, how it's justified. It's a very complex composition engine. InDesign also has the Adobe Single Line Composer. I'll choose this temporarily, and this doesn't look so bad, but essentially what's happening here in InDesign's mind is it looks at the first line of text, does any hyphenation and justification, and then when it moves on to the second line of text, by the time it's on the second line, it's completely forgotten about what's on the first line. And actually, that's how most page layout applications work. InDesign's Paragraph Composer is much more complex and powerful. It looks at several attributes of each line for the entire paragraph all at the same time. So I'm going to turn back on the Paragraph Composer. Again, that's the default and the one I use virtually all the time, but you do have a choice there. In addition to the ability of turning hyphenation on and off and choosing which composition engine that you want to use, you also have here in the flyout menu the ability to actually control the hyphenation. So let's bring up the hyphenation dialog box. We'll slide this up just a little bit so that we can see the dialog box and most of our paragraph, and we're going to turn on preview. Of course, we're turning on preview so we can see the effects of the changes that we're making. We have several detailed options here. You can experiment with these on your own time, but essentially this is controlling the parameters or kind of the limits of hyphenation. You know, we only want to hyphenate after the first two letters because we wouldn't want a hyphen after just the first letter of a word. That would look pretty odd. Some other options here. Now here at the bottom there's two options that I want to point out. One is hyphenate last word. This is actually a feature that was added in InDesign CS2. A nice little detail. I love the obsession with detail from the InDesign team. So notice right now this long word, the last word of the paragraph, is hyphenated. I can disable that, and InDesign will be forced to not hyphenate those last words. Similarly, you can toggle hyphenation across columns as well as capitalized words. So in this scenario, you might have proper names, maybe even names or words in another language that you don't want to be hyphenated because they could hyphenate in funny or awkward ways, so you could turn that off as well. Now the slider here in the middle has 11 stops. The reason it has 11 stops is some folks don't know what to make of this, so they want something right in the center. That is the default. However, you can play with this slider. For example, if I want better word spacing, and you can see that tighten up here a little bit quite nicely, the trade-off of better spacing is that you have more hyphens here on the right-hand side. On the other hand, if I want fewer hyphens, I can drag the slider all the way to that end and you see fewer hyphens. However, the word spacing up here at the top is getting a little funny. We're getting some of those rivers of white space again. So we can play with this to our heart's delight, get something that works just right. I'm going to go ahead and leave it back at default in the center so we're all looking at the same thing, but make sure you play with the hyphenation slider. When you're done, go ahead and press OK to see the final results.